Welcome, folks, to another episode of Buyside Hippies. Sports Hoya Politics. To be the best at what you do, you need to have that X factor which takes you to the top. Today, we have with us a very special entrepreneur who holds a number of world records in the field of speed math. And he is working with a startup to change the way math is delivered to young kids around the globe. Let's decode his journey and his startup to understand what makes him the best. Happy watch. Happy to have you here, Bhanu. I'm super excited to do this podcast and host you on Buyside Hippies. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you for all the good work that you've been doing in the EdTech sector and making a lot of noise. All the funds are running after you. You're being considered as the next EdTech genius of some sort. So, just to basically help to understand what are you really doing? What is your startup all about? Maybe you can just start off and just first introduce yourself and just help me understand what is Bhanzu.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Asim, for having me here. And I think, hopefully that is the idea, to build out an edtech company which actually is changing the way education is. So I think, quick introduction, I am Neelakantha Bhanu. I hold a bunch of world records for being the fastest human calculator, have been around the math learning ecosystem for the longest amount of time. In fact, almost 4 to 5 years since I've started teaching at an individual capacity. I think in my journey, I was introduced to mathematics in a fun and a very true way, in a way where I've loved the experience of how I've learned mathematics. It was a sport to me. It was an art form. It was a true learning experience. As an individual, I have been in mathematics for a long time. I started out at the age of 7 into competing in math competitions. And over the next 6 years or 7 years, I actually went on to become the national champion and the international champion at speed arithmetic math championships. And by the time I was 15, I was titled the fastest human calculator after breaking the world records, which were once held by Miss Shakuntala Devi and a bunch of other folk who are very, very famous in math. My journey as my journey as a individual mathematician who was taking and winning competitions into an educator started out sometime around 2018, when I was first, I just went into this public school in Telangana, in Hyderabad, back in the time, to teach mathematics to children of middle school. And I realized that math education, or the way children math perceive, is so different than what my experience has been. It's scary. It's unrelatable. It's something which is very distant from what a child's learning trajectory is. And even kids who were in 8th grade, 9th grade did not know that multiplication is repetitive addition. There was a lot of dissonance in terms of what we expect a 10th grader to learn versus what they know. And the repercussions of not being good at mathematics or not being in terms with mathematics actually flows into career choices, into what decisions you take as, let's say, you are growing into the academia, whether you continue school or not. And seeing this, realize that there is a lot to be doing. There's a lot to be done around math education, even in the presence of hundreds of edtech companies, a lot of curriculum which is out there. There is still a lot more to be done here. And I think this was when I started touring across the world. In fact, in the last 5 years, I've traveled 23 countries and did 500 plus stage shows, conducted more than 2,500 classes to understand that math phobia and how it translates is different across cultures. It's different across places. But the idea of 3 children out of every 4 children being scared of mathematics is more omnipresent. Bhanzu, which was formerly called Exploring Infinities, Bhanzu is a math education company which started out by being a research firm for 2 years, from 2018 to 2020, when we, with the team of a bunch of people who are the core founding team today, actually went out to schools and started understanding how you could make math more fun and relatable, build math confidence in children. And we realized that speed mathematics is one of the best ways to do so. story narrative driven curriculum, making sure that they relate to a problem. I think these were some elements which we've picked and experimented a ton of curriculum to actually find out that we're doing well in these, and this is what we want to take global. And that's when we founded Bhanzu as a commercial entity. And it's been what, a year and 8 months, 7 months since we've been as a commercial entity, and it's been a true scale up from then.
Right. I remember having a conversation with you in our Bookwest dorm room back in Stephens about how you were exploring and like sort of piloting this project you had with Exploring Infinities, and now it's become a big startup backed by Lightspeed India, and like I'm sure, man, a lot of good things are coming for this particular for your journey ahead. Like I first just want to understand. So now that you have started be on this mission to sort of remove this maths phobia, which I agree, and this has been and your startup has taken off in a great way. There's so much noise in the market about Bhanzu, probably be the next Byju's or the first Bhanzu, who knows? But that's something we have to see. But I just want to understand, why did you name your startup Bhanzu? What is the story behind Bhanzu?
Asim, I think we've rebranded only in January, which is around 6 months ago. We were exploring infinities prior to that. The rebranding was entirely because I think me being the fastest human calculator and me being an individual who has seen math from a lot of different ways has a lot of impact in terms of what conversation we drive in math education. It's not just another company which has just been here to bridge the gap between supply and demand, but it's a true journey of me as an individual in the last 22 years of my living and all of that put together, and these translating into a vision and mission which I have. I think in the beginning, I was thinking that this is probably not the way I would want to go ahead, but it made sense because I think a lot of people and how they related to what we do was around the lines of saying, okay, there is a thought leader for once who's actually creating an EdTech company, because usually it is not that way. It's a bunch of graduates who see an opportunity and build out the supply for a certain demand. But instead of that, the flip side, which is I care a lot about the subject. Me and the founding team, we have worked a lot about how math education and global math phobia can be eradicated. I think that personal touch is something which we wanted to bring, and I think that's where we did a lot of branding exercise, and we realized that we probably want to name it around one, the ethos or the individual who has become the world's fastest human calculator, sure,
right?
But also
right.
In a slightly Gen Z flavor, which is where the Z comes in, I think. Yeah.
And so like also like when I'm just seeing your journey, I remember back in college, you were the fastest human calculator, as you had stated, and it was just always like sort of like interesting to watch what's Bhanu going to do next, and probably you also had another startup before Bhanzu, sort of your project, which you were running in college. When in college, people were just focusing on their grades, trying to figure out their placements. You were always like 10 steps ahead, and gotten into the startup ring very soon. That's pretty cool. So I just want to understand, Bhanu, so I understand a little bit about your business model, and I want to further explore it to understand why are these investors going all chasing you right now? Like there must be something really cool you're offering here. So I just want to understand, how does your platform work to remove the math phobia? Who are your target audience? Who are your sort of teachers? How are you building? How have you built this business from scratch?
So I think the idea was always to build out a product which actually works. I think that always is, the primary interest point, and something which I have optimized for all the time, which is make a curriculum which works. I think that's what we spent 2-3 years of time in before we even started as a commercial entity. Our target audience is children and students of the ages 5 to 15 who have not had the best experience with math learning in the past.
Okay.
2, who had great experience but want to do a lot more in terms of applying math in the world around them. And 3, students who want to be engaged into learning math in a different sense, because usually the way a math curriculum sort of is built is, let's think CBSE, NCERT, or let's say a board building a curriculum. They have a north point saying that this is where a 10th grader should get to, and this is how I reverse engineer what curriculum these children have to go through, let's say in their formative years. Now, this sort of a methodology might not work entirely because of I'll give you a quick example. Think of you giving a child one piece of a jigsaw puzzle every day.
Right.
Right. Ideally, you should be giving one piece of the same jigsaw puzzle every day.
Correct.
But what if you give one piece of one jigsaw puzzle every day to a child, which is of 5 different jigsaws? 6 years later, maybe the child will finish the jigsaw, but will there be the element of surprise? Not really, because you're building 5 jigsaw puzzles or 6 jigsaw puzzles at the same time. You're not letting that child or a student have that straight away, oh, I know what I've learned. I know where it logically connects. I know what's next. That sort of a thing misses out because of the limitations of a school construct.
Correct.
While EdTech companies have usually been working around, how can I just make sure that these children get better in school, which is where you still work in the same realm. Now, to question status quo and build a curriculum entirely based on how children learn is a step back and creating a market of its own. Some people have been able to do this in the past. Some people have not been. Definitely not in math education in the recent times, because India is a land of edtechs, which is entirely focused towards test preparation, or let's say the Asian understanding. But it's not going to be the same way a few years down the line. Now, looking at this, we at Bhanzu have built out a curriculum which makes children quicker and better at calculations through online live classes, where teacher teaches 5 children in a classroom on how to become quicker and better at basic math. The foundations, once set in stone, makes them explore concepts which are required for them to master in school, academia, and finally apply the math in the world around them, so that the entire journey is complete. I become confident, I become relevant academically, and I finally become an explorer. I think that is the journey which we have created and has gotten a lot of traction. Neelakantha Bhanu Prakash, me as an individual becoming the fastest human calculator, might just be the place where people hear to what we do, but the true reason of Bhanzu's success is the outcomes of curriculum which we've been able to pull off in the first 6 to 7 months of our being there. And I think these outcomes, or these ability to get into the market of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, where math education usually is just about how do I get better at school curriculum, versus changing the narrative of saying, I'm going to make every student cognitively capable, mathematically strong enough so that they can do better in life. I think we being able to sell that proposition to children across the world, I think has been the biggest success. And I think as far as I go, investors, these are just outcomes, right? I think people come to you when you believe in a true mission and you're being able to do that sustainably. And I think that's how I see it. I don't see raising investment, raising capital to be success of any kind. I think it's just levers to make you go to wider audiences. But having worked with governments in the past, having worked with high scale projects, numbers are not new for us. I mean, we've at least the Bhanzu core team, we have seen teaching almost 1 million, 2 million children during the lockdown time through direct or indirect impact. So today what we do is just, I think, us doing the right things in terms of what an EdTech should be doing, and optimizing and building a space where tomorrow or 6 years down the line, 5 years down the line, we are the most thought through math curriculum there is. And I think that's what we tell ourselves at Bhanzu almost on a daily basis.
Understood. Like our question, so you talked about your audiences between 5 to 15 years. And I also see, like, when I was also growing up, like I took math tuitions, right? A lot of people in India take math tuitions. So is your audience primarily, I just want to understand, are these your Indian students, or are you targeting students abroad who might not have access to the same quality teachers which you can have access to in India at a cheaper?
I think it's actually any parent or student who wants to have a true learning experience with math. When I say this is more cosmopolitan, global than global. It's wider, right? I mean, it's very global that way. So today we have almost 1/3 of our students from Middle East and Southeast Asia. Wow. 2/3 of our students from India. Small contributions from across the world, because we don't want to spread ourselves a little too thin. But we believe that this is a math product which exists in a certain way and it's built in such a way that this can be spread globally. And I think there is no limitation in terms of this is the forte, this is the kind of people I'm selling this to. No, this actually has the potential to be a global household. Almost every single individual should do this kind of a courseware.
Got it. No, so I just want to like hold you on this point. Now that you mentioned that 2/3 of your audience are in India and 1/3, I would say, abroad, and this is likely to grow as well because this is a global product. Math is a global subject. There's no language barrier which stops anyone from learning this and removing their math phobia. I get it. So as I understand, your particular business model is mapped to one teacher for every 5 students at the moment, right? If and correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, so this is based on some of the research which I was doing, and I just wanted to understand. Right now, you're hiring a lot of, say, teachers, very capable, competent, highly qualified teachers. Primarily, I believe in India, and you're offering their ways of like teaching methodologies from your curriculum which you've built, your proprietary curriculum across the world.
Yes.
Now, I just want to understand, when you're scaling up, do you think this model of, say, having hired teachers from India is going to be sustainable? Because after a point of time, the more you grow, for every 5 students, you need to hire one teacher, right? After a point of time, don't you think like the competent teachers at some point will eventually run out, and then you need to sort of compromise on quality, or, say, for example, increase your batch size? I'm just thinking in terms of how you're thinking in terms of scaling right now.
Asim, a teacher would not be 5 students because a teacher will take multiple classes. I think that's one to start with, because I think from our understanding, a teacher can cater to almost 65 students because they can take around 13 batches each. I think there is an entire calculation behind it. Now, the point is, in the world of edtechs where 1:1 classes are being promised,
right,
I agree with let's say, part of your argument, which is you will run out of teachers who are competent enough, because 1:1 linear scale might not be the same. While at 1:5, your saturation will hit at 5 times the volume, which means that we are more or less sorted until we have, let's say, 500,000 children into the ecosystem. And that will take enough time for us to get there. Now, meanwhile, we actually are building a lot of product expertise in terms of making bigger classroom sizes be available for individuals, where you have a lot more dexterity in terms of understanding feedback of students, understanding what they're understanding. So that, I think, tech enables that scalability after a point. But I think that is a problem of tomorrow. As far as I go, I think to reach, and I'm just so that I put it out there here, reaching 500,000 students is something which we believe can happen with the kind of model which we are at. And I think that is a good problem to have when we reach that scale. And meanwhile, we are mitigating and creating alternate business strategies, models, delivery, where you have a product first approach, build something which customizes the learning trajectory, where the teacher might not be the center of the entire instruction. I think these are projects which will run for a couple of years before something comes out of it. But that's something which we are working towards actively, which is why we have a fantastic engineering team at Bhanzu, which works exclusively on this.
Understood. So no, that's great to hear about, like, how you're thinking about these particular pertinent sort of like thought processes about future as well, while optimizing your current your current startup situation, which is great, man. Like, hats off to you on this. So Bharu, one last question about your startup. Like, I've seen a lot of these edtech startups, they gain a lot of traction, make a lot of noise. Lido Learning was a very recent example, which ended up shutting its shop. So many people were unemployed, like were fired because of the startup just ran out of money. So I'll ask you, it's more of a philosophical question. Why do you think something you will succeed, Bhanzu will succeed, while something like Lido Learning could not replicate what you are planning to do? What are you planning to like change in terms of your narrative?
So Asim, I don't think it is the right thing to say that, let's say, companies which have, let's say, shut shop in the recent times have done something wrong. I think it is always a factor of not only the company, but market. I think global trends, global macroeconomic factors, I think these all play a major role in terms of how startups and they navigate their own space.
Correct.
Every startup founder thinks that they have the right to win, which I think is a fair way to, let's say, get their day going. But at the same time, I think it's very, very important to understand that as long as you stick core with your principles, look ahead by at least a couple of years and look at what you're doing and understand, and not overspend, overgrow, bite more than you can chew, I think you're in a fairly good position.
Correct.
I think As far as, let's say, a bunch of other EdTech companies, or let's say how they have scaled, there have been fantastically global nice stories from EdTechs, and at the same time, things which did not do very well. I think it's entirely about how people feel about what you do. It's about a lot of other factors, which I think are not only core centered towards the startup. There is no right answer to this, because I empathize with, let's say, the companies which have had the best products and the best offerings lose track somewhere in the middle. And I think founders have been really nice to actually respect the investment which they get, so that they are not, let's say, over or doing something. As far as I go with Bhanzu, I think I've never looked at this as a short-term gig. For me, it's always been, let's say, how do I build this to a global multi-billion business? Being the first thought, or the first thought actually preceding this would be, how do I make this business in such a way that we can touch the lives of millions of children sustainably? So, right? I mean, you can't, let's say, spray money or optimize for the wrong reasons, be carried away by a bunch of successes, which might or might not be sustainable. So I think having a constant critical eye is the only way you mitigate risk. And I think one thing which I think gives Bhanzu the right to do really, really well is the team we have built together, a fantastic set of individuals who are optimizing for every part of the business. And at the same time are delivering experiences in children and students which are unprecedented for. And I think these and whatever we've been doing will be the ones which separate us out from any other education or a math education company which is scaled up. And I think the idea is to become the world's largest math education startup. And I think that's the moonshot, right? I think it's not about finding an opportunity. This, as an individual, I think this is a life mission. And I think in that sense, we have more to lose. Hence, we have to make it work.
You know, I actually like just hearing you now and like just comparing who is India's biggest edtech startup right now, Byju's. They say that there's something that's very similar between you and Byju's. You both were very, 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 very similar in terms of how brilliant you guys were and what you guys did. And I hope to see that you don't become the next Byju's, but the first Bhanzu. And that is something I'm really putting my hopes and the money on. That Byju's doesn't define or sort of is a metric of any startup success. It's what your own individual journey and where you want to sort of go with that. Bhanu, like, is a brilliant man, but I just want to understand you a little more deeply. Bhanu, how did you get into entrepreneurship? Everyone has a story. What is yours?
I think I absolutely enjoyed building. And I've always understood, let's say, seen people around me build institutions, build companies, and I've always understood that there is a certain amount of art and math which goes into, let's say, building an organization which is successful. As an individual, I've been exposed to businesses from being a very young individual, because my father himself has headed a proprietorship in food tech for the longest amount of time. I've seen these as we grow, realize that enterprise and the way enterprise and startups, or for that matter, businesses can impact and create employment, create opportunities, create things which mean a lot. That is something which excited me as an individual. I think ever since I was a child, I was very, very hooked to the idea of how money works, how let's say individual behavioral patterns are. As an individual, I mean, I've always looked at businesses and say, how do you think these businesses work? How do you think these businesses become big, right? I think right from food tech, healthcare, education, technology, social enterprises, have been exposed to a lot of these as an individual. I think as let's say someone who broke a bunch of world records, thanks to that, I was invited to the biggest startup conclaves to address their events back when I was 16, 17. I remember speaking beside almost 3 to 4 I think 2 to 3 billionaires back in when I was 16 on how they've built out their businesses and understood these stories. I've always looked at opportunities in a certain way since. As, let's say, someone who's going to college, I was exposed to a lot of conferences, a lot of places where I was helping people set up their own businesses. In fact, a little bit of consulting angle there in terms of saying, how can, let's say, technological automation, how can prediction modeling impact how a business looks at it? Being someone who is a math graduate, I've always looked at how constraints, limitations, optimizations function and how these have humongous applications when you build out a large one. The art of negotiation, I think, is something phenomenally interesting in terms of how human psyche functions and how you, let's say, navigate your way through negotiation, through understanding people, through giving numbers and metrics to unmeasurables. As, let's say, a 17-year-old, I started out a couple of ice cream stores in Hyderabad back in the time, ran them for a while, understood what retailing was, worked on a couple of startup ideas around healthcare tech, which eventually something which I did not pursue for the long run. But I think the intent of building any business should always be, why do I care about this? Can I sustainably care about this for 10 years to come or more? Does it matter to me on whether this succeeds or not to a very core level? Because then you'll give it your all. And I think that's what happened with Bhanzu when we started this off. In college, I've also, let's say, done a bunch of my own, let's say, phase of understanding consultancy, understanding how business consultancy works. Almost joined a consultancy firm, and yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of different aspects of money and businesses through mathematical lenses. So realize that this is something which I would want to do. Building an institution is something which I would love to do, and yeah, here we are. I think that business acumen is not something which you get overnight. I think it happens over times of you carefully studying what works, what didn't work. But at the same time, not just taking any other journey as a proxy to yours, respecting other institutions and startups which have been built very big. I see that you were referring Byju's previously. I've always loved how, let's say, a couple of individuals have, let's say, changed the landscape or even the ecosystem altogether. And I think, yeah, bringing these together and talking to the right people, talking to the right customers, always understanding what you'd want to build, constantly recalibrating on how you'd want to see micro businesses, macro businesses, how scale to be achieved, were some things which were very interesting. Yeah, I think that's how I was exposed to it. And I think the biggest one thing which I probably want to attribute my entrepreneurial journey and its early success to is, I think, go get your hands dirty. And I think that's what I think has worked for me, which is, if you think that you would want to see how this works, instead of, let's say, putting beside, while I appreciate 100 Excel sheets on why this would work or why this wouldn't, just go out and try it out. Because I think sometimes customers speak the best language which you need to hear.
Right. And this is great. Like the perspective that you've given. I want to point one thing out. I remember back in college, all the big consultancies were running after you. They all wanted you to be part of the journey. And you said, no, boss, I am going to start up. This is what I really feel about. And I mean, it just shows, man, where you've reached in life and what you're doing. And I'm really excited about what's coming next for you. So I have just one last question for you, Bhanu, before we end this podcast. What's coming next for you and for Bhanzu? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years?
As I mentioned, right, I think we are here to build out a business which has a global impact in terms of how math education is. When I say this, I think I mean that Bhanzu being the place which has changed how millions of children look at mathematics and has shaped their own careers is what we're optimizing for. The rest is all background noise. I think the rest is something which we will achieve. We will make sure that we push through these. But I think building a place or let's say a learning environment which encourages individuals globally to change how they perceive a subject, and more importantly, attribute their success in it to Bhanzu being what we optimize for in the times to come. What's up next? I think, yeah, I mean, startups, as you know, obviously, what news can you have? I think having nice success stories, raising capital, I think these are all a part of the process. But I think, as far as I go, I think establishing Bhanzu as the thought leader for global math curriculum and how it's created would be what I think my next six to 7 years would look like. And yeah, I think that should be what success is.
I really feel for your cause, Bhanu, and you know, it's what, as you'd mentioned, raising money is more of an outcome and not really a metric of success. Very well said, Bhanu. And I'm really excited about what's coming next, and best of luck, Bhanu, for your journey
Thank you.
ahead. It's really fun
Thank
having
you.
you.
Thanks a lot, Azim. Yeah, thank you.